Coming up, President Trump's message to Iran. Unconditional surrender now.
They were bullies. They were schoolyard bullies. And now they're not bullies anymore.
The stark warning and Iran's response as missiles light the skies over Tel Aviv and Tehran for a sixth day.
And the political debate for lawmakers grappling over just how much the United States should get involved.
Plus, to lower or not to lower the Federal Reserve's interest rate decision and how it impacts your wallet.
And transgender divide, the Supreme Court's decision on controversial medical treatments and minors. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation.
Major uncertainty tonight as President Trump considers his next moves on Iran. Good evening and welcome to Faith Nation. I'm Jenna Browder.
And in Washington, from our Washington News Bureau, I'm John Jessup. Well, the world keeping a watchful eye on President Trump, who, for now, is refusing to say whether he'll launch a strike on Iran, even as Israel continues a sixth straight day with its bombing campaign.
Yeah, the uncertainty comes as the U.S. military beefs up its presence in the region. A third Navy destroyer has moved into the eastern Mediterranean, and a second carrier strike group is on its way to the Arabian Sea. And when reporters press the president outside the White House, asking if he'll authorize an attack on Iran, he left the door wide open.
I may do it, I may not do it. I mean, nobody knows what I'm going to do. I can tell you this, that Iran's got a lot of trouble, and they want to negotiate. And I said, why didn't you negotiate with me before? All this death and destruction, why didn't you negotiate? I said to the people, why didn't you negotiate with me 2 weeks ago? You could have done fine. You would have had a country.
And Iran's supreme leader is rejecting U.S. calls for surrender, warning that any American attack would bring, quote, irreparable damage.
Well, for more, let's bring in our panel, CBN senior White House correspondent Kelly Wright and Benham Bentaleblu, senior fellow with Foundation for Defense of Democracies and senior director of FDD's Iran program.
Welcome to both of you. Kelly, let's start with you. President Trump, he says, as you heard there, nobody knows what he's going to do, but we can all see this military buildup. What are you hearing from the White House, Kelly, about how close we actually are to a U.S. strike?
Well, I can tell you, Jenna, that no one is speaking for the president's actions except the president himself. You just saw what he said there on the South Lawn when they were actually erecting a flagpole and raising one of the largest flags that we've seen. In addition to that, he spoke again about the situation with Iran and Israel from the Oval Office, to which he clarified his statement that he made earlier, stating that he alone knows the decision that he's making, and he would like to reserve his final decision making that announcement 1 second before it's due. Having said that, he doubled down on the fact that he wishes Iran had made the deal, taken the deal. Remember, he provided them 60 days to make a negotiation for peace. And he stated that there's no way that Iran can have a nuclear weapon. To that end, here we are, and the president is still holding out hope that he can have some sort of diplomacy and diplomatic end, but he's still reserving the right to make sure that all options are on the table.
All options on the table there. Benham, I'd love to get your take on this. Is Tehran bluffing with its response of threats? And if Iran is preparing for a real showdown with the United States and Israel, can you talk about the limitations of its military capabilities to strike back now after 6 days of the bombing campaign?
Well, great to be with you all. Listen, I think the Islamic Republic understands that both Israel and America are conventional military powerhouses, and the bulk of the Islamic Republic's military and security strategy is designed for asymmetric, if not hybrid warfare, designed to slow an adversary, then push a political resolution more to its own favor. I actually think here, where the Islamic Republic excels at crisis bargaining, but is actually, as you see very before your eyes in the news, a very poor conventional warfighter. And what that will mean is that the Islamic Republic will threaten to widen a war, more likely in a bid for leverage. But then once the shooting starts, I do think this is a regime that worries about saving face and pride and is already deeply insecure and feels the need for personal and political reasons, including and up to the views, values, and the legacy of the current supreme leader of Iran, Ayatollah Khamenei, to respond. I mean, this is someone who has been authorizing more overt ballistic missile activity against targets in the region, including U.S. bases, including against Israel, since 2017. So I think very realistically on the table is the Iranian threat of widening the war in a bid to deter and prevent the American entry into the war. But if there is American entry into the war, be it against a nuclear facility or against the political leadership, I think it is highly likely that you will see, for instance, short-range ballistic missile strikes, ballistic missiles that we don't know if the Israelis have hit or not, because the Israelis have been going after the longer range stuff that can actually traverse over 1,000 kilometers and reach Israeli territory. So the Iranians will probably use that shorter range inventory. And it's worth noting that those shorter range projectiles are actually more precise and have greater battlefield utility. So here you're thinking about the entire southern rim of the Persian Gulf, the constellation of countries that have U.S. bases, as well as potentially proxy activity in Iraq and Yemen directed at U.S. military diplomatic facilities in and around them. So I think the Iranians will try to widen the war, and then they'll try to bait and bleed America. But if you had to ask me if America is in and there is an American life lost, I think President Trump might go all the way.
Yeah. Kelly, back here at home, there appears to be a growing divide in the GOP about how involved the U.S. should be in the conflict. We see President Trump, Tucker Carlson even, going against the president. What's the president saying about all of this?
Look, the bottom line, the president is not showing any concern about what Tucker Carlson or some of the people within MAGA or the Republican Party have to say. His base, he states, is still in love with him, probably more in love with him, he added, more in love with him now than they were during the election. And he went on to talk about the fact that his decision has to be made. He's meeting with all of his cabinet members and his national security team. This president knows that he will stand with Israel. To what capacity that means in terms of warfare, we do not know, except he did state today from the White House that if a war is done, it would not be a long-term war.
Israel is hitting what it claims are Iran's nuclear sites. How much damage do we know has been done to Iran's nuclear program? And do you think that that could be a trigger to push Iran to cross a new line or a new threshold?
Well, in so many ways, the Islamic Republic has been barreling past the previous thresholds. I mean, the Islamic Republic is the only country without naval nuclear propulsion, of which you need 60% enriched uranium for, to be producing 60% enriched uranium at home. The Islamic Republic is the only country without first having developed a nuclear weapon to also have developed a previous normative things that would restrict a quote-unquote normal country. I think the regime is probably thinking about one of two things as it relates to the crown jewel of its nuclear enterprise, and that's Fordo. One is the threat or the potential of taking the feedstock of highly enriched uranium that they have at 60% and moving that to 90% now. That is one big fear. The other fear, of course, is in the event of a strike or in the event of several rounds of strikes, the Iranians may try to divert what's left of their enriched uranium stockpile and try to hide it and make it mobile, and then really increase the threat of loose fissile material to the United States and its partners. So there is a very, very real proliferation threat that can have transnational implications here.
All right, Benham and Kelly, both, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Well, concerns of a broader conflict that could include the United States have lawmakers on both sides of the aisle considering their role regarding Congress's War Powers Authority.
CBN's Michelle London joins us now live on Capitol Hill. London, what are lawmakers saying?
Well, while it is technically within Congress's power to authorize and declare war, some lawmakers are pointing out Article 2, which states a sitting U.S. president does have the right to step in and defend the country. Earlier, Pennsylvania Senator John Fetterman told me and other reporters the U.S. should step in and act.
It's like clearly they're trying to build a bomb. We can't ever allow that. We have an opportunity to take it out. You know, we should all do that. We have the capabilities to do that.
Senator Fetterman, a Democrat, has long been a vocal supporter of Israel. Today, he told us the U.S.'s involvement against Iran shouldn't be controversial. Republican Senator Lindsey Graham agrees, posting, quote, this is an extremist regime that, if given the chance, would wipe Israel off the map and then come for us. They must never get that opportunity. President Trump is about to put a period on that statement, end quote. And listen to what Florida Senator Rick Scott had to say. Take a listen.
He doesn't want to go to war. He wants to defend the freedom of this country. So I'm sure he'll make the right decision.
Meanwhile, Kentucky Senator Rand Paul, however, wants restraint, not escalation, stressing the importance of diplomacy. GOP Senate leaders have not yet taken a stance on whether President Trump needs congressional approval before taking military action against Iran. This week, Democrat Senator Tim Kaine started a movement of his own to limit the president's ability, introducing legislation to prevent him from acting against Iran without permission from Congress.
A president has the inherent power under Article 2 to defend the United States without asking for permission, but it's been the understanding since the very beginning of this republic that if it's more than defending the United States, if it's going on offense in any way, congressional authorization is needed.
Kaine introduced a similar bill during Trump's first term and didn't get enough votes. This time around, he says he has the 51 votes to get it done. Even so, it would need to be passed by the House and could be vetoed by the president. And concerns over possible military involvement with Iran is not limited to Congress. A YouGov Economist survey shows only 16% of Americans polled support for U.S. military action. This comes in the wake of the recent No Kings nationwide protest over Trump's immigration policies. In recent days, those protests have led to one Democratic mayoral candidate being arrested and released by ICE. And in California, another 2,000 National Guard troops being deployed to L.A. John, Jenna?
All right, Michelle London on Capitol Hill. Thank you, London. Well, Virginia will elect its first woman governor in November. Tuesday's primary election sets the stage for a battle between current Lieutenant Governor Republican Winsome Earl Sears and former U.S. Representative Democrat Abigail Spanberger. The two will spar over issues like abortion, transgender athletes in women's sports, and the economy. And Virginia's lieutenant governor race will also make history. Gisela Hashmi would be the first Muslim and Indian American in statewide office, while Republican John Reed becomes the first openly gay man to win a major party's endorsement for statewide office.
Coming up, a big turn in the fight over transgender rights. When we come back, what the Supreme Court's landmark ruling means for transgender medical care and minors.
Welcome back. A major Supreme Court decision today upholds Tennessee's ban on gender transition treatments for minors. In a 6-3 ruling, the justices said the law does not violate the Constitution. The decision marks a major setback for transgender rights advocates and a win for those who think these kinds of treatments shouldn't be given to kids.
That's right. The majority said these are complex issues best left to lawmakers, not judges. But the dissenting justices argue the decision harms transgender youth by allowing discrimination. For more on this, we're now joined by Hans von Spakovsky, Senior Legal Fellow at the Heritage Foundation. Hans, welcome back to Faith Nation. So first question, what do you see as the key takeaway from the Supreme Court's ruling in United States versus Scrimetti, and what does this mean for both Tennessee and the 26 other states with similar laws?
Well, the laws were challenged under the idea that they violated the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. And what the Supreme Court said was there's no equal protection issue here. It's not discriminatory. It applies to all minors, regardless of their sex. And moreover, you know, the challengers tried to say that heightened scrutiny, strict scrutiny should apply. That's the strictest standard that the Supreme Court applies when legislatures pass laws. No, the court said all the legislature needed was a rational reason for passing this legislation. And there were more than rational reasons. You know, the court said, look, this issue is, there's fierce scientific and cultural debate about this. There are people with good intentions on both sides, the court said. It's not up to the court to step in and decide an issue like this. That's a policy decision. It should be left to the democratic process legislatures. You know, what shocked me frankly, is that there were 3 justices on the court who thought that parents should be able to, in essence, engage in surgical mutilation of their children, because that's what this kind of treatment does. So that actually should be shocking to people.
Justice Sonia Sotomayor, to your point, in her dissent, she argued that the majority ruling abandons transgender children and is influenced by political whims. Hans, what's your reaction to that?
This treatment is dangerous. It's so dangerous that in England they have banned it. Studies are now showing that the long-term effects of this are extremely bad for children, and the idea that this somehow abandons them, I just don't think that's true. In fact, I think the idea that parents should be able to, let's call it the way it is, that children should be able to allow castration of teenage boys and mastectomies of teenage girls to change their outward appearance, that to me is child abuse. And I think what Sotomayor was saying was that that kind of child abuse should be allowed.
Hans, we only have a few seconds left, but do you think that this case settles the issue with transgender medication and treatment in youth, or could we see more challenges down the road?
No, this settles the issue. This means that the 24 states that have put in these kind of bans are safe now from any kind of challenges. So when it comes to minors, this issue is settled.
Okay, Hans von Spakovsky with the Heritage Foundation. Always good to see you, Hans. Thank you. And up next, the Fed's latest decision on interest rates. Will it affect your mortgage, credit cards, and savings? We break it down after this.
Well, welcome back. After a morning of anticipation, the Federal Reserve has decided not to cut interest rates any further. The move comes as no surprise to traders who predicted the Reserve would hold rates steady at about 4.25%.
So when will consumers see changes? Ted Rossman, senior analyst at Bankrate, joins us now. Ted, welcome. So the Fed is giving us some guidelines when rate cuts may come. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it definitely wasn't today. It's almost certainly not going to be next month. September is potentially a meeting to watch. Although the higher for longer camp does seem to be gaining steam. There were actually 7 of the 19 participants on the Federal Open Market Committee who said that rates may not fall at all this year. If they do, it seems like September is probably the earliest that would happen. The base case, the median estimate, is still for 2 quarter-point cuts this year, maybe 1 in September and 1 in December. Still a lot of uncertainty moving forward about tariffs and jobs and the state of the economy. But the net for consumers is expect higher interest rates to be with us for a while longer.
So if we can get to the nitty-gritty of the net, what exactly do you think will be the impact of that Fed cut? Will it mean lower mortgage rates? Will it mean lower rates on car loans?
It's good news for savers, bad news for borrowers. The fact that rates are likely staying higher for longer. The average credit card rate right now is around 20%. That's close to a record high. That's not going to move meaningfully anytime soon. The average 30-year fixed mortgage rate is 6.9%. We're looking at about 7.2 for the typical new car loan, 7.6 for used cars. None of these rates are likely to move all that much this year, which has borrowing kind of on pause for many. I mean, it's still not a great time to jump into the housing market or buy a car. I mean, certainly some people are doing it, but the rate landscape is not likely to change a whole lot this year. Even next year and the following year, the Fed adjusted their median projections up a little bit. So the so-called terminal rate, like wherever interest rates eventually land, might be a little bit higher than we previously thought. That neutral rate might be creeping up a little bit. I mean, even a couple of years from now, we might be talking about short-term rates that are a point and a half lower than they are now. The Fed still wants to wait and see on inflation and jobs and tariffs, and they're just not ready to move just yet.
Yeah, Ted, how much will the Fed have to cut rates, do you think, before it really makes a difference for people?
It depends on the product. I mean, something like mortgage rates, the Fed doesn't directly set those rates. They more tend to track long-term 10-year treasuries, and investors have a lot to say about where those rates are going. The Fed's important, of course, but they're also factoring in inflation and economic growth. And, in some ways, there's a little bit of a be careful what you wish for, that if mortgage rates were to drop substantially anytime soon, it would probably be if something bad happened to the economy and people were worried about recession and unemployment. So we don't want that. We want rates to come down for good reasons, which would be inflation easing, the economy staying in solid shape. So lots to sort out there. I mean, if mortgage rates did fall a point, let's say, by this time next year, that could free up some activity in the housing market. I mean, it's a big if, but that would put rates below 6%. They're not going back to the 3 or 4% that we saw a few years ago anytime soon, but that would help. For something like a credit card, though, you're hardly going to notice there. If it's 18 or 19 or 20, I mean, those are all high.
Yeah.
All right, Ted Rossman with Bankrate, thank you so much for your time tonight. Coming up, a woman's inspiring life of gratitude. That's next on Faith Nation.
All right, finally tonight, a New Jersey woman makes it her goal to shower others with gratitude.
It is a project that she's been working on, get this, for more than 10 years with incredible results. Ellen Webster just accomplished her goal of sending 10,000 handwritten thank you notes. She was inspired by John Kralick's book called A Simple Act of Gratitude. Webster started coming up with the ideas for recipients other than friends and family, including grocery store employees, doctors, and her favorite authors.
And I started having so much fun kind of observing where my attention was drawn and to what people and to what activities could I write and thank somebody for.
And it was only fitting, speaking of authors, that her 10,000th thank you note went to the man who first inspired her. And he also replied back that he hoped it brought her many blessings. What a cool thing to do. It seems like a bygone era to write thank you notes. But
do you write thank you notes?
Occasionally I do.
Yeah.
Thank you for watching.
Have a good night.